Welcome to Knaresborough, one of the most gorgeous towns in all of Yorkshire. Famed for its stunning riverside scenery and iconic railway viaduct, Knaresborough is an irresistible place to visit, with a fascinating history behind the many spectacular views you'll find all around town. Here, we're taking in the most famous view in Knaresborough, overlooking the River Nidd and the town's mighty railway viaduct from up on high, among the ruins of the medieval Knaresborough Castle. This is the spot where everybody who comes to Knaresborough wants to be, and in a moment we'll take a tour of the ruins of this once great fortress, which bears the tales of many important moments in English history. But while the castle occupies a prominent position in Knaresborough, the town's icon is without doubt the beautiful railway viaduct we can see down below. Carrying trains that run between nearby Harrogate and the city of York, the viaduct was opened all the way back in 1851, crossing over the striking Nidd Gorge, around which the town of Knaresborough has developed over time. The construction of the railway through the town here was a major event in Knaresborough's history, with a particularly action-packed first few years, before the viaduct became a legendary local landmark. There's more to the story of Knaresborough's famous viaduct and the mighty gorge which it crosses, and we'll talk more about that later. But let's first take a look around the castle here, before we drop down towards the riverside. Here on the westernmost corner of Knaresborough Castle, there stands this war memorial overlooking the river down below. Surrounded by beautiful flower arrangements, the memorial pays tribute to the men of Knaresborough, who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. However, it was another war, the English Civil War, that brought about the downfall of Knaresborough Castle, which, as we can see around us today, stands almost entirely ruined. A castle has stood on this site above the Nidd for the best part of 900 years, although most of the stonework that remains today dates from the early 14th century. At the heart of the castle grounds in front of us, meanwhile, there stands one of the newest and best preserved parts of Knaresborough Castle, the Old Courthouse, which was built at the turn of the 17th century. Originally, the building was used for record keeping, but after the destruction of Knaresborough Castle following the Civil War, it was allowed to remain in use as a courthouse, a function that it retained all the way until the 20th century, when it was later converted into a local museum. But of everything that remains, the clearest evidence of this castle's former grandeur is this, the ruined King's Tower. The King's Tower dates from the 1300s, during a major rebuild of the old Norman castle that existed here before. At first, the rebuild came under the reign of King Edward I, who saw Knaresborough's fortress as a key strategic stronghold in his campaign against the Scots, who were periodically invading and raiding wide areas of northern England at the time. But the King's Tower was the work of Edward's son, King Edward II, who capitalised on the newfound strategic significance of Knaresborough Castle to convert it into a truly magnificent residence as well as a military stronghold. And so it proved the case. In the year 1318, Scottish raiders reached as far south as Knaresborough here and burnt most of the town to the ground, although the castle, now well protected, became the sole point of refuge for the fleeing townspeople. A couple of decades later, Knaresborough reached newfound fame, as its castle became the beloved royal residence of one Queen Philippa, the wife of the following king, Edward III. Philippa would summer here in Knaresborough with her family, transforming the castle into a luxurious residence, complete with gardens, and of course, spectacular views out over the Nidd. A couple of centuries after its heyday under Queen Philippa, however, Knaresborough Castle had fallen into a state of relative disrepair, no longer the powerful military fortress that it once was. And so came the English Civil War, at the outset of which Knaresborough sided with King Charles I and the Royalist cause. But in 1644, just a few miles to the east of Knaresborough, there occurred one of the most significant turning points of the Civil War, the Battle of Marston Moor, where the parliamentarian armies of Oliver Cromwell defeated the Royalists. Before Marston Moor, northern England had been a key stronghold for the king. But after the battle, the parliamentarians began sweeping across the north and besieging garrison towns like Knaresborough. The siege of Knaresborough lasted for about a month in the bitter winter of 1644, during which time the parliamentarians bombarded the castle and sought to starve the 400 or so men defending it. Eventually, the royalist defenders surrendered, but the castle hadn't actually been destroyed during the siege. However, with the aim of preventing it from being used by any royalist forces in the future, the castle was slighted or deliberately damaged beyond repair by the parliamentarians. The Roundheads had intended to demolish the castle completely, but the people of Knaresborough petitioned them to retain the courthouse and the King's Tower, which was often used as a local prison. Otherwise, much of the stonework that made up the once great castle was taken for the construction of buildings elsewhere in town, and many houses that still stand in Knaresborough today are built of this castle stone. But having now taken a walk around the gardens of Knaresborough's historic castle, we're now making our way out of the east gate over the old moat, or more likely the old dry ditch, and which will lead us into the heart of the modern town. But before we get into the centre of Knaresborough, it's about time that we took a look at a map of the local region, to see exactly where in Yorkshire this town is located. As you can see, Knaresborough lies just 3 miles to the east of Harrogate, and as we mentioned, on the railway line towards York, in this fairly sparsely populated part of North Yorkshire. Now, Knaresborough's castle, originally built in the early 12th century, was the first major development in this area, and in the medieval period, a small civilian community emerged to serve those who were living inside the castle. In the 900 years since, Knaresborough has blossomed into a flourishing market town filled with houses, shops, and many pubs, like the Cross Keys here. The pub is one of the many 19th century buildings you'll find in the town centre, built during a period when Knaresborough was undergoing a modest revolution of local industry, which for centuries had revolved around its market, historically held just a few steps away from where we are now. But here, set back from the road known as Castlegate, we find a cosy little shopping complex, complete with delightful boutique outlets and galleries, catering to the many visitors who come to explore Knaresborough every day. Long before this was a tourist hotspot, however, this point in the town was busy with local industry, that being the manufacture of linen, which had taken place here in Knaresborough since the Tudor period. For much of that time, linen weaving was carried out in people's homes, but in 1808, this building, the Old Flax Mill, was constructed to prepare raw flax, used in linen textiles, before it was spun and woven at other mills around town. For many years, Knaresborough was renowned as the home of some of the finest cloth textiles in Britain, and the Old Flax Mill even remained in operation for nearly 2 centuries, ultimately converted into an art gallery in the year 2000. Nowadays, you could say that tourism has evolved into Knaresborough's main industry, with the heart of the town, the castle, and a number of riverside attractions, all very well maintained for both locals and visitors. Now here we're passing by the Market Tavern, one of no less than 3 pubs to be found on Knaresborough's central marketplace. Of course, after the building of Knaresborough Castle, markets emerged in the 12th century as the civilian settlement here expanded, and as more and more traders came to Knaresborough to buy and sell goods, new taverns were also built to give them a place to have a drink and rest their feet before returning home. At the time, long before the spa town of Harrogate had emerged, Knaresborough was the largest market town in this region of Yorkshire, and so its weekly Wednesday market was a crucial part of life for people not just in this town, but in surrounding villages for miles. Wednesday markets are still held here in Knaresborough, as they have been done since the year 1310, around the town's historic market cross. But as well as markets, the benches that surround the historic market cross are also the home of 2 statues of some famous local figures, Mother Shipton, who we'll talk about later, and Blind Jack. Here there stands a pub named after Blind Jack, a bit of a local hero in the area in the 18th century. As the mural above the pub's entrance depicts, Jack was a famous local musician who learned to play the violin and oboe after he lost his sight from smallpox at the age of 6. But by the age of 15, Blind Jack had become an acclaimed musician in the many plush hotels and ballrooms in Harrogate. Jack, or John Metcalfe as he was christened, lived an accomplished life, living to the age of 92, during which time he famously became a pioneering builder of roads in the Industrial Revolution. But just across from Blind Jack's pub, we find another famous landmark on the marketplace, named the oldest chemist shop in England, which operated as a chemist's from 1720 all the way until 1997. After 277 years of dispensing medicines, the shop was reopened in 1998 as a combined fruit and vegetable grocers and gift shop, and nowadays it sells trinkets and other souvenirs to tourists in Knaresborough. Now on the whole, Knaresborough's streets are lined with fairly modest shops and houses, but here back across the marketplace, we're looking up at the rather imposing Old Town Hall, built back in 1862 and which dominates the beating heart of the town centre. Initially, the first floor was the home of assembly rooms used for civic events, with a grand balcony from which local MPs would make speeches to the people of Knaresborough. The ground floor below, meanwhile, was originally open, used to serve as the site of the local market, before being turned into a lovely indoor shopping arcade in the early 20th century. In recent years, Knaresborough's Old Town Hall has taken on a number of different uses, including the Castle Courtyard Shopping Centre that remains on the ground floor to this day, while the old assembly rooms on the first floor were at one point rather surprisingly converted into a local nightclub. Knaresborough is a town that's certainly at its busiest during the day, with a mix of locals and visitors strolling its streets. But the many pubs and restaurants that you'll find in the town centre do mean that there's still some pleasant nightlife to enjoy too. Though for rowdy nights out, many locals make their way on the train to nearby big cities like York and Leeds. Knaresborough's strong transport links with nearby cities is an important part of what keeps the town ticking in the modern day, and we'll talk more about that in a short while. But here, we now find ourselves on the town's busy high street, where we're looking over towards the old NatWest Bank, built in 1858. The building is currently unused, as the bank closed its doors in 2017, just a few years before Knaresborough rather strangely became one of the largest towns in Britain without a bank. The last bank branch in the town closed down in March of 2021, leaving just a couple of ATMs, which has been causing a fair few problems for locals, as the nearest banks now are located in Harrogate and Wetherby. However, plans are in place to get the banks of Knaresborough open again, with a new shared scheme between branches known as a banking hub, set to open by the end of 2022. In the interim, there's plenty of shopping to be done in the many independent stores you'll find on Knaresborough's High Street, and in and around the marketplace and castle, while the town's many pubs still stand as one of its most easily accessible features. There are no less than 10 pubs in the centre of this town of around 15,000 people, and there were once many more. Across the road here, we can see what was one of the largest pubs in Knaresborough, the Commercial Hotel. Though now closed, the Commercial was for a long time known as the Borough's Bailiff, named after the fact that, in the 17th century when the building was built, it used to be the home of the local Borough's Bailiff, who was in charge of local law and order. The pub sadly closed down only recently, after many years of serving the people of Knaresborough. But of course, there are still many more alehouses that you can stop in for a drink in this town. Just along from the old Commercial Hotel, there stands the Crown Inn, rebuilt to its current form in the early 20th century, but which was historically one of the main inns serving travellers along Knaresborough High Street here. Now historically, Knaresborough's High Street wasn't quite the busy thoroughfare it is today, for many centuries sitting rather isolated from the main centres of industry in Yorkshire, which left the town at a great disadvantage at the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Initially, while cities like Leeds boomed with their own textiles industries and profited from fortuitous geography, Knaresborough struggled to make an impact in the rapidly growing textiles trade in Yorkshire. For manufacturers in Knaresborough, it was more expensive to transport goods to be sold elsewhere, and that's why the town then decided to shift focus towards manufacturing higher quality cloth. As we mentioned earlier, the linen produced in Knaresborough ultimately came to gain great acclaim, and by 1838, one of the town's producers, Walton & Co., was appointed as official royal linen manufacturers, bringing much needed attention and income to the town after having taken a while to get off the ground. Transport issues were solved by the mid-19th century with the arrival of the railways over the viaduct, which we'll visit again in a few minutes' time. Here though, we're walking along Finkle Street, home to a range of houses built in the 18th and 19th centuries, and which are now the homes of many more Knaresborough locals, many of whom live in this town, but often work in the big towns and cities nearby. In recent years, with good rail and road links to Harrogate, York, Leeds and more, Knaresborough has become a bit of a commuter town, where people live and then commute elsewhere to work. As such, Knaresborough has quite a pleasant, calm atmosphere all through the week, and it's one of the most desirable places to live in North Yorkshire today. Of course, the many gorgeous vistas and spectacular surrounding landscapes that draw in tourists are there to see every day for the people that live here. But if we're speaking about attractions in Knaresborough, then there's one place that we absolutely can't forget to mention. Over on the other side of the River Nidd from the town centre here is what's said to be the oldest fee-paying tourist attraction in England today. It's known as Mother Shipton's Cave, and it, along with the spectacular petrifying well next door, has been open to visitors ever since 1630, even before the English Civil War. Now we sadly weren't able to film in Mother Shipton's Cave today, so you'll have to visit Knaresborough for yourself to get a look at it up close. But it's famous for more than just its natural beauty, as the cave in question is thought to have been the birthplace of Mother Shipton, whose statue we passed by on the marketplace. Mother Shipton, or Ursula Southill to give her real name, was a famous soothsayer of the 16th century. Legend has it that she was born in the cave in Knaresborough during a violent thunderstorm, and a great crack of thunder sounded as she entered the world for the first time. An archetypal witch figure of the period, Shipton was said to be hideously ugly, a maker of medicinal remedies, and most famously, apparently able to predict the future, with a number of her prophecies having included the English Civil War, the reign of King Henry VIII, the Great Fire of London, and even the invention of cars and trains. And speaking of trains, we now find ourselves at the bottom of Kirkgate, where we find the railway line that passes through Knaresborough. This is Knaresborough's delightful railway station, which has been almost entirely unchanged since 1890, although that year saw the third rebuilding of the station since the railways originally arrived in the town in 1851. The station as we know it today sits just a few yards along the line from the mighty railway viaduct, which too was built in 1851. The only remnant of the original station of that year, meanwhile, is an old water tower at the other end of the platform. But the station is as much of a delight as any other spot in Knaresborough, with the old ticket office now converted into a pleasant little cafe and tea room. To get past the railway tracks, we have to walk through a conveniently placed tunnel underneath the line. And as we mentioned, the line plays an important role in Knaresborough's current status as a commuter town, as trains run directly from the station here to both York and Leeds. The line through here was originally built in 1848 from the York direction, and before the viaduct was completed 3 years later, trains used to stop a short distance away at a temporary station at Hay Park Lane. Now we mentioned that Knaresborough Station's old ticket office is now used as a cafe, and just across from it, there's also the Mitre Hotel, opened in 1923 on the site of an old pub known as the Wheatsheaf. One of the many delightful places to have a drink and a meal, or even to stay overnight in Knaresborough, the Mitre would surely also be a great place to stop for train spotters, on account of a perfect view out of the window. In a moment, we'll make our way down the steep cliffs of Knaresborough's town centre towards the riverside, where we'll be able to get a close-up look of the railway viaduct in all its glory. But before we get down there, there's just one more landmark up here that we need to take a look at. Inside these gates is one of the longest occupied sites in the heart of Knaresborough, where we'll find the town's impressive parish church, built between the 13th and 15th centuries. However, the history of this site goes back just a little further than that, as records of a church here date all the way back to the year 1114, around the time when the first castle was built in Knaresborough. A Saxon church may have existed here long before then, but at that time, Knaresborough was nothing more than a very small riverside settlement. That original church was destroyed in 1318 during the Scottish raids that saw most of the town burned to the ground. But just 10 years later, King Edward III raised the funds for the church to be rebuilt, and after a series of expansions and restorations, it remains intact to this day. The church, today known as St John the Baptist, is set among a beautiful churchyard that sits a fair distance from the castle and marketplace, historically the very heart of Knaresborough. This indicates a fairly unusual history, wherein the church developed almost independently of the castle, originally the main settlement here, rather serving the civilians who came to live on the outskirts of the fortress. It is the largest church in town, although Knaresborough is also famous as the home of one of England's most unusual churches, a chapel carved into the side of a cliff, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Now, the churchyard as we know it today is surrounded by a number of different buildings, and once upon a time it was bordered by the garden of a small cottage, which in 1717 was the birthplace of none other than Blind Jack, the famous musician turned industrialist who conquered England from humble beginnings here in Knaresborough. Now, we're making our way down this staircase that descends the steep cliffs atop which the town of Knaresborough is built. Slightly unusual for an inland town in the heart of Yorkshire, the cliffs that exist today were formed by glacial activity tens of thousands of years ago that diverted the River Nidd through what was once a soft sandstone landscape, creating the Nidd Gorge that exists today, which is as much as 40 metres deep. That's given rise to a number of very steep streets connecting the riverside with the clifftops, such as the cobbled water bag bank here, where we find this beautiful little white thatched roof cottage that's said to be one of the oldest buildings in Knaresborough, dating to the 13th century. Ingeniously built on the steep cliffs here, the cottage also offers some stunning views of the River Nidd, and Knaresborough Viaduct just a short distance away. Now, the River Nidd is extremely picturesque here in Knaresborough, especially on a sunny day, and you can always find a bustling mix of locals and visitors strolling alongside it all year long. But the viaduct is without doubt the centrepiece of both the Nidd Gorge and Knaresborough as a whole. As we mentioned, it was built in 1851, but the line from York was meant to cross the river and link up with the line from Leeds as early as 1848, when another viaduct had been built. Unfortunately, just as it was about to be completed, the original viaduct collapsed dramatically, said to have been caused by heavy rain in the preceding months and some less than stellar workmanship. After the collapse, trains stopped at the temporary station on Hay Park Lane for 3 years, but the railway company went all out with the rebuild of the viaduct, turning it into a truly magnificent landmark that's still standing over 170 years later. Underneath the viaduct, however, you'll find a collection of historic buildings, like Teardrop Cottage here, which was built over 300 years ago, and before the neighbouring houses were built, it was a working croft, with a huge garden that housed pigsties, chicken sheds, vegetable plots and more. But over time, the riverside here gradually became denser and denser with buildings, particularly as industry began to pick up in Knaresborough. Before the beautiful viaduct came to tower over the Nidd Gorge, the river was a significant place for many local mills, which used the river's flow as a power source. In a moment, we'll pass by a former Indigo mill of the 17th century, but as we look across the gorgeous River Nidd, we mentioned a few moments ago that the cliffs of the gorge here are also home to a rather unusual church. Much further down the river, you'll find the striking Chapel of Our Lady of the Crag, carved into the base of one of the town's sandstone cliffs. It dates from the early 15th century, and according to local legend, it was carved out by hand by a man named John the Mason, who was working in a quarry on the site, and who saw a rock come falling down towards where his young son was playing. Unable to reach his son in time, he prayed to the Virgin Mary, and the rock miraculously changed direction. In gratitude for the miracle, John pledged to create a chapel, which he did with the blessing of King Henry IV, creating an unusual but legendary local landmark for Knaresborough. If you're in town and have the chance, do take the time to stroll along the River Nidd towards the Chapel of Our Lady of the Crag. As for us, however, we're nearing the end of our walk around Knaresborough today, which will finish in a moment underneath the castle where we started. Here at the heart of the town's delightful riverside, however, the white building we're passing by is the old Indigo Mill, built on the site of a centuries-old corn mill, and which from the 17th century was used to make indigo dye from woad, a plant grown locally. The indigo dye was then used in the neighbouring dye house, which supplied linen manufacturers around town with dye for many years. Nowadays, most of these former mills have been converted into houses, which have some of the most wonderful views you could ask for. The view of the viaduct from the riverside is now popularly regarded as one of the very best in Yorkshire, if not England as a whole, while the vistas across the town from the castle, perched on top of the cliffs above us here, and the captivating streets of Knaresborough's delightful town centre, all make this a town that's an absolute joy to stroll around. On a clear day like today, Knaresborough is at its prettiest, with picture postcard views telling the magnificent story of a town full of history. Having begun life with the construction of its fortress, this delightful market town has been through raids, wars, economic booms, and more over its centuries of existence, while a number of famous figures like Blind Jack and Mother Shipton have given it a truly rich local heritage. But sadly, we've now come to the end of our walk around the gorgeous town of Knaresborough. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to visiting Knaresborough for yourself in future too.